I'm Bill Gibbons. I'm Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Safety and Homeland Security, and I also chair the Governor's Public Safety Subcabinet. I want to welcome all of you here this morning. Really, we're trying to achieve two things today. One, talk a little bit about where we stand and what we've been able to accomplish during Governor Haslam's first term. You will see in your packet a progress report submitted by the Subcabinet. That progress report contains 14 different measures of our progress. So I hope that during the course of the day, you will take an opportunity to look at that progress report. We also hope to talk about the challenges we faced during Governor Haslam's second term. And really, this should be viewed as an initial step in a discussion through which we can identify the actions that need to be taken during Governor Haslam's second term. This summit is sponsored by the Governor's Public Safety Subcabinet. This administration has a commitment to successful partnerships for a safe Tennessee. So I'm very glad to say that the Tennessee Association of Chiefs of Police, the Tennessee Sheriff's Association, the Tennessee District Attorneys General Conference, and Tennessee Voices for Victims are all serving as co-hosts of this event. On the back of the agenda, you will see the members of the Planning Committee. And I hope during the course of the day, if you run into any of them, you will thank them for their hard work in putting this summit together. I would be remiss if I did not mention one member of the Planning Committee in particular, who is kind of the de facto chair of it, and that is Linda Russell, who is somewhere. I know that she was here late last night, here early this morning, and I thank her for her hard work and her leadership. Various departments, agencies and organizations have also provided staff support for this event, and I thank all of them. When Governor Haslam created the Public Safety Subcabinet in 2011, he probably saw it as an experiment that might or might not work. But I can say that so far we have completed about 60% of the specific action steps we identified as part of the action plan in 2011. And we're on track to meet our goal of a 75% completion rate by June of next year. It has truly been a team effort. We've had very good attendance at our subcabinet meetings. And frankly, it's helped that Governor Haslam has been present at most of those meetings. It's the result of the governor's vision that various departments and agencies have been able to unite as a team. So it is with thanks for his commitment to this approach that I introduce to you the Governor of Tennessee, Bill Haslam.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. Thank you all. Please have a seat. Thanks. It is really good to be here. The speaker and I were sitting here when there was a momentary delay when we were waiting for the color guard to come in, and the speaker said, I think they're waiting on someone to do something. And I said, at this moment, I'm always just hoping that it's not me that has forgotten to do something. The very first, where did General Haston will tell you, about my third week in office, about a week or two before that, General Haston called me and said, hey, we're having the annual meeting of the Tennessee National Guard, Saturday, February 1st. I'd been sworn in on January 15th or 16th, whatever. Said, you need to be there. It's in Murfreesboro. And I was like, General, my daughter's coming in that day, and I kind of whined a little bit about why I couldn't do it. And he said, you need to be there. So I said, okay, well, I'll come. So I come, and it's in a ballroom in Murfreesboro, about this size, General, maybe a little bigger, maybe 50% bigger than this. And I have me in a little holding room, and then waiting, and a little while, the sergeant comes and gets me and says, come with me, sir. And we're standing outside some kind of double doors in the back, and then they open them, and you hear this loud, and by the way, the room is filled with the men and women of the Tennessee National Guard, Air and Army, in uniform, their battalion flags flying at the end of their rows. It's a pretty impressive sight, and the little streamer showing all the different battles that they fought in. And so pretty soon this voice comes on over the loudspeaker saying, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Commander-in-Chief of the Tennessee National Guard. And I thought, wow, that's pretty impressive. And this sergeant elbowed me and said, that's you. So whenever that happens, I'm like, uh-oh, am I supposed to be doing something here? Well, welcome. We are glad you're here. I realize it is the first thing on a Monday morning in a busy time of year. All of you, regardless of where your responsibilities fall in this room, all of you have incredibly serious and critical responsibilities, and the fact that you would take time out to be here says something. 4 years ago when we started, the Commissioner's right, I set out to make Tennessee the #1 location in the Southeast for high-quality jobs. But if you're going to do that, that's not just about going out and recruiting business to come to your community or your city or your state. There are a lot of things involved in there. It means getting your education policy right so that you have the right trained workforce. But more than ever, it means creating the right community and a safe community that people are attracted to. And so before I ever came into office, I asked Commissioner Gibbons, first of all, I was trying to talk him out of his DA job in Shelby County. And finally, after a long series of conversations, I'll emphasize long, it took me a long time to talk him into doing this, he agreed to come. But in the process, we had come up with this idea of what if we had a public safety sub-cabinet of all the different agencies that are impacting safety in our state, and had them work together. And I asked the commissioner if he would come and share that. And so they set off on this, and to be honest with you, it was a model. People talk a lot about sub-cabinets, but I look back in the history of the state, there had been a lot more talk and a lot more announcing of groups than there had been any work out of that. And so Bill and I agreed that we wanted this to be something real. And that group has worked together. They've met regularly to implement a coordinated plan. They truly have worked across different parts, departments and agencies and state government, really focused around 3 goals: ending violence on our streets and violence in our homes, fighting drug trafficking and addiction, and reducing the number of repeat offenders. So 4 years later, where do we stand? Through a data-driven approach to enforcement by state troopers, we've cut the number of impaired driving fatalities by almost 8% since 2010. Reported crimes in 46 key categories have dropped 14.3%, and reported major violent crimes have dropped 4.9%. We've created more drug treatment courts, and the number of offenders receiving treatment continues to increase. Since 2010, the number of meth labs seized has dropped almost in half, and the number of children removed from homes for meth-related incidents has plummeted 60%. Since 2010, reported domestic violence offenses have decreased almost 14%. I'll be really clear, they're still too high. We're still on the wrong side of the national average, but a 14% decrease is a good place to start. The state has supported the creation of family justice centers in Memphis and Nashville, modeled after the one already established in Knoxville. Plans are underway to add 5 additional centers across the state to provide assistance and services to the victims of domestic violence in one location, and hopefully make it easier for those victims to work through the maze of the criminal justice system. We've worked with the General Assembly, and I want to thank Speaker Harwell and Lieutenant Governor Ramsey, to enact mandatory sentences for repeat domestic violence offenders. Along with the support of the General Assembly, we now have tougher sentencing laws to combat certain serious gang crimes, a more streamlined approach for prosecutors to use in seeking enhanced sentencing against gang members for committing gang-related crimes, and a state nuisance law that gives courts the clear authority to tackle criminal gang activity through the creation of geographic safety zones. Today, you're going to hear about some additional public safety challenges that face our state, including a violent crime rate that, while it's heading in the right direction, remains far too high, the high rate of prescription drug abuse, an increase in heroin and crystal meth use and trafficking. We particularly are concerned with the recent influx of heroin, the very real problem of human trafficking in our state, and the continuing need to reduce the rate of repeat offenders. Let me just end by saying this. This is really when I look at the state efforts in different areas, this one is unique in the sense of who's represented in this room. Folks from the criminal justice system, law enforcement, district attorneys, judges, victims advocacy groups, family safety and drug treatment providers. If you look at the people in this room and who you represent, it's really a very unique coalition of people coming together. You know, prior to being in this job, I had the honor of being the mayor in Knoxville. And of all the different things I did as mayor, the thing that I really enjoyed the most quite frankly, was working with our police department and the law enforcement agency, because at the end of the day, I felt like they were people dealing with real issues in a mission-sensitive and mission-driven focus. And I didn't always see that in other places of government, but when I when I worked with our law enforcement and as they interacted with the judicial system, the criminal justice system in our community, and as we put together things like our family justice center in Knoxville, I saw really what I felt like was unique in government, a willingness for people to work with folks who did not do the same thing they did, but were working on the same issue. And because of that, like I said, as I look back at my time as mayor, that's probably the thing that I enjoyed the most and I'm most grateful for. So when I come together in this room, I am grateful for those of you who are here this morning. The fact, again, that you'd come on a Monday morning in a busy time of the year speaks volumes. And just know that as governor, I'm grateful for what you're doing, and we're committed to keeping this headed in the right direction, where the crime numbers and the impact on victims continues to decline, so that this state can be the place that we all want to live in. Now with that, am I introducing the speaker or are you?
Feel free to.
Okay, good. Well, it is an honor to introduce the speaker. Beth Harwell is not only the first female speaker in the history of the state. In my opinion, she's one of the very best speakers in the history of the state, if not the best. We've gotten a little trouble, and you might have read the newspapers recently, people saying that we work together too closely, which is an interesting thing to accuse people of in government, that they're working too hard to work together. Normally, you have people who tend to see what we can fight about, but what I love about the speaker is she truly is trying to solve problems. So please join me in welcoming one of Tennessee's very best assets, the Speaker of the House of the state of Tennessee, Beth Harwell.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I offered, when the governor and I were seated up here together, to pick a fight with him so he could prove that he was not as nice as people think he is, and that we didn't get along all the time. But he refused to participate in that, which I'm glad. Well, thank you all so much for what you do for our wonderful state, making it a safer, better state to live in. And Commissioner Givens had asked me to say a few words about an issue that has been in the news quite a bit lately, primarily because of the NFL players, but the whole issue of domestic violence. But not only has it been in the national news, it's also been in Tennessee's news as well. And reports of domestic violence assaults, or even worse, domestic-related murders, happen regularly. There is no dispute that domestic violence is a major crime concern in Tennessee. And in fact, in 2013, domestic violence offenses made up 51.4% of all reported crimes against persons in Tennessee. And while that statistic is not acceptable, Tennessee is making progress in the fight against domestic violence. Since 2010, as the governor said, there has been a 14% decrease in reported domestic violence offenses in Tennessee. And in 2014, Tennessee was ranked the 10th highest in the nation for the rate of women killed by men. This is an improvement, actually, from 2012, when Tennessee ranked 3rd in the nation of the number of women killed by men. What is making a difference? Well, first, the state is working to increase the number of family justice systems, like Nashville, recently opened Jean Crow Advocacy Center. These one-stop shops offer legal and social services and assistance for domestic violence and their victims and their children. Family justice centers work by giving the victim help to remove himself or herself from an abusive situation. And they make sure victims do not fall through the cracks of the justice system and are more likely to follow through with prosecution. As the governor said, at his request, the General Assembly has also enacted legislation creating mandatory incarceration for repeat domestic offenders. Prior to this law, there was no real legal deterrent to committing acts of misdemeanor domestic violence over and over again, because if you did, you just simply got probation. Now, a second domestic violence offender receives a mandatory minimum 30 days of incarceration, and a third offense receives a mandatory minimum 90 days of incarceration. While the progress made is very encouraging, there is still much more to do on this critical issue. We must not let up our fight to break the cycle of domestic abuse and help save lives in Tennessee. Thank you again for all you do for our state.
Thank you, Governor and Speaker Harwell. There are a number of General Assembly members who did pre-register for this summit, and I do want to recognize them, and I apologize if I'm leaving anyone out. I realize some may have shown up this morning and registered, but based on the pre-registration, we have with us Representatives William Lamberth, Mary Littleton, Pat Marsh, Deborah Moody, Jay Reedy, and Barry Doss. And we have Senators Paul Bailey, Mark Green, Brian Kelsey, Becky Duncan Massey, Ken Yeager, and Randy McNally. And we appreciate very much your attendance today. With that, what we're going to do is simply segue into our first briefing of the summit. And that is a briefing on the domino effects of violent crime. And we're going to begin with the District Attorney from Shelby County, Amy Wyrick. So if General Wyrick and others would come forward.
Good morning. I am Amy Wyrick, and I am honored to serve Shelby County as its district attorney. And my task is to speak to you about gang violence. And those of you in the room know that when we hear those words put together, we think of two different things. We think of the organized groups of violent offenders who have a name, who have colors, who have a handshake, who have leaders, who have meeting places, and all of those battles that we face in our communities. But what we also deal with are the unnamed, the anonymous groups of young people terrorizing some of our segments of the community. And I'm going to start with, I hope, a video.
We good? First group, Get up, bro. Get up, bro. Get up, cuz. Get up, cuz. You getting broke, cuz. Cuz, this Grace Street West, cuz. This Grace Street West, cuz.
This the little they beat the shit out of this little young nigga though.
Cuz, get up on your feet, cuz.
I'm GD though, bro. Y'all good?
Y'all cook.
I'm fucked by man Wooker, bro.
Cuz, get up, cuz.
Y'all put it.
Nah, they ain't getting put. They getting broke off the set.
Hey, I'm down.
Cuz, get up, cuz.
Yeah, no.
Cuz, get up, cuz. Oh, this shit, that cuz hold the time. Come on, cuz. Oh, there, come on. Get up, cuz.
Come on, cuz. Hell no. Hell no. Hell no. I did it.
It's hard to watch. And it underscores the issues that we deal with, the challenges that we face in identification of those perpetrators and in pursuit of justice for not only that victim, but for every member of the communities that we serve. And obviously, those of you in uniform that risk your lives day in and day out know those risks and those challenges better than anyone. This was a case that was prosecuted to the best extent that we could under the laws of the state of Tennessee, given the challenges that we face with uncooperative witnesses and conflicting testimony and statements about whether this young man was trying to be beat in to the gang or trying to be beat out of the gang. And because of those challenges, we are blessed to have a governor and a General Assembly who have helped us in that fight and have helped us make the laws in the state of Tennessee address the needs that we are facing with our young people. How does a young person, whether that young man wanted to be beat in or beat out of the gang, how do they get to that point in the first place? I remember a case years ago of a young man who was on scholarship in college, had a baseball scholarship. His mother worked for the Memphis Police Department, and he wanted to be a member of the gang and was beat into the gang over Christmas break. And unfortunately, that beat-in resulted in death. But it underscores again the social challenges that we face, not just the legal challenges, but how does a young man who has what seems to be a bright future ahead of him and a solid foundation still yearn for what it is that the gang violence, the mob violence brings to the table. The next slide is much easier to look at. That is a picture of Governor Haslam in beautiful 201 Poplar. How many of you have visited 201 Poplar? I won't ask why, all right? He came to sign into law the gang enhancement statute, which those of you in the room who pore over the Tennessee Code Annotated know what a blessing that is to us as prosecutors to help us in the pursuit of justice, and also the work that is involved from not only the prosecution end, but before we even get to that point, the law enforcement end. On the left there is the multi-agency gang unit logo. Shortly after I took office, we had a new police director in Memphis by the name of Tony Armstrong. We had a new sheriff, Bill Oldham, who is here with us today. And the three of us got together and decided to recreate a multi-agency gang unit, hence the catchy title that we came up with. And what we wanted this gang unit to be was different than what had happened in the past in Shelby County. First and foremost, we wanted it to be local, state, and federal, because we understood that as soon as we squeezed the balloon in certain parts of Shelby County, the gang violence is only going to move to the north to Tipton County or move up the road to Fayette County. And if you bring the feds to the table, it increases that jurisdiction. So we went to our U.S. Attorney, Ed Stanton, who very quickly agreed to be a part of it. And we also went to the FBI. I saw Todd McCall in the audience. He's there. And the ATF. And they quickly agreed to be a part of it. And when I say quickly, that's really for today's purposes only. None of this was quick. When you have that many lawyers and law enforcement officials combined in a single purpose, it wasn't quick. But we all had the same focus. We checked our egos at the door, and we knew that we were committed to not only the tough prosecution end and doing everything we could from the state, local, and federal level to make sure that the worst of the worst got the message that they deserve from the community, but we also all felt very strongly about the prevention and the intervention. Early on in my term as district attorney, I found myself out in the community, and I know the sheriff and the director and others of you in the room have had the same experience, and a woman comes up to you afterward and tugs at your jacket and says, "Can I talk to you privately?" And she pulls you aside and she says, "My 9-year-old is hanging with the wrong people. What can I do?" Well, it wasn't good enough for me, and I know it's not good enough for you to say, well, if they commit some felonies, we've got some really great programs for you. So we wanted to be able to have that prevention and that intervention step to keep those 9 and 10-year-olds who are being harassed on their way to school, who are being pulled into that life of gang violence. We needed to have some answers and some work for them. So we work very closely with intervention workers that work on the streets and in the schoolyard and in the hospitals. As soon as there's a gang shooting, there's a hospital intervention worker that is there at the Regional Medical Center trying to diffuse what many of you know will be that next criminal attempt murder or that next aggravated assault when the gangbangers decide to seek their own justice. So this gang enhancement statute signed by Governor Haslam helps us in that road, or on that road rather, to eradicate the violent criminal gang activity. To do that, to help build that case, is where the gang injunctions come in, and that's the slide that you see on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. That is a safety zone that was declared by our Judge Potter. He's our environmental court judge. And for those jurisdictions in the room who have used the gang injunction statute, you know how much work is involved in that, not only from a law enforcement aspect, the undercover, the getting into the area, deciding what area you're going to focus on, where do we have the biggest problem, where do we also have a good base, where do we have good members of the community that will step up and help us rid this community of the gang violence. And it also takes a lot of legal work. So we are very blessed in Memphis to work closely with our mayor, city mayor, and our city attorney's office, and they loan us lawyers to help us with the hundreds and thousands of hours of legal work that goes into an injunction. We have filed 2 in Shelby County, thanks to the great work of our multi-agency gang unit officers. We've filed 2 that we can talk about publicly. We have filed a 3rd that is in between the private and public announcement of that, but stay tuned to your newspapers and local news for that announcement. One of those was in the Riverside area, which is South Memphis, had been ridden by gang activity for decades, drug and violent gang activity. And then the most recent one was a couple of weeks ago in the medical center against the Dixie Holmes murder gang. And it makes it very easy as a prosecutor to go to a judge and prove that this group of thugs has nothing but violent intentions when their name happens to be murder gang. So that made our case a little bit easier. And both of these communities are very different in the way they look and in their history. But what we have found in the Riverside area with the gang injunction was that the community was so ready for it. They were so appreciative of not only the presence of the officers, but knowing that our focus was not just about locking people up. Our focus with these gang injunctions is to restore strength and stability to a neighborhood. The legal aspect of it, the tough gun, hammer slinging part of a gang injunction is really very minimal. If they are found in violation of the gang injunction, they're looking at a contempt charge. But what it does is it tells gang members 2 or more of you are not allowed to stand on the corner. And the power and the strength and the foundation that brings back to a neighborhood has really, I know, surprised all of us, because in government and in law enforcement particularly, when we try something new, we're always mindful that we could make things worse. We could just be driving a train over the cliff. And fortunately, we have not had that experience, knock on wood, with our gang injunctions in Shelby County. But it takes everyone working together. Of course, it takes the law enforcement, and after the gang injunction is filed, it takes that heavy presence of law enforcement, which means extra men and women and extra resources. But it starts to build up that trust. And we've seen the calls for service in the Riverside area plummet. And we've seen the level of trust and respect and quality of life go through the roof. And that's really what it's all about. And then, how many of you have seen this? This is the Kroger Poplar Plaza incident that occurred a few weeks ago. Oh, no, it's not. There we go.
In my job, don't even for lie. All these motherfucking kids, fucking hood rats. Ah, they finna fight, they finna jack. Hold on, they got a white dude. Hold on, look at him. Oh, wait a minute, let me get out the way. Wait. Oh, shit. Wait a minute. Oh, damn. Oh, what is security? Oh, shit, damn. What's security?
Being mindful of time, and because I'm not sure any of us can stand to watch that anymore, that video underscores, again, the issues that we all face. That was not organized gang violence. That was a group of kids who were out long before curfew was up, who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time or the right place at the right time, depending on your perspective. But for those victims, it was not racially motivated. It was not gang motivated. It was young kids who have somehow lost their way. And as angry and as upset and as vengeful as we may feel when we watch a video like that, I think we have to remember our responsibility to the community and the public. And the mob violence that followed that from the local adults in our community and adults across the nation demanding justice, demanding this and that, reminded us of the oath that we take every day to follow the law. And everything and anything that we do has to be guided by the laws of the state of Tennessee. Those cases have been handled. The worst of the worst are handled in the best way that we could under the laws of the state of Tennessee. But oftentimes with our juvenile offenders, we handle those matters with one hand tied behind our back. And for the others that stood by and did nothing, who stood by and didn't intervene, hopefully they've learned a very important lesson. And hopefully they have learned how to be the Good Samaritan that we need everyone in our community to be. Let me end with one good story out of the Riverside area. We held a community forum shortly after we had issued the injunction to see if it was really working. We knew what the numbers were telling us. We knew that by looking at the data, things were going well, but we wanted to hear it from the community. It was a Sunday. There was a church in the neighborhood that opened its doors to us. Commissioner Gibbons came for the day, the sheriff, the director, the FBI, the DEA, all of the usual suspects were in the room. We passed out flyers, and we opened it up for the community to come and tell us what we did wrong, and did we do anything right. And they came, and they came, and they came, and we opened up the microphone. And for those of you that have sat through public forums, you know we clenched the sides of our chairs just bracing for the worst. And the first woman that took the microphone began crying. And I remember looking over to the sheriff and thinking, this is going to be a train wreck, and we're driving the train. She said, before this injunction, I used to have to sleep on my floor because of the bullets coming through the window overnight. But since you filed that injunction, I get to now sleep in my bed. And that's what I think inspires all of us every day, to keep fighting the good fight, keep pursuing justice for all the right reasons. And with that, I am to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, the director of the TBI, Mark Gwynn. Thank you.
Thank you, General Wyrick. Let me see if I can. I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about how we see gangs from a law enforcement perspective, kind of looking at trends that I see coming as I get briefed on a national level on a couple boards, national boards that I'm on. And the first slide is just really from a survey that we conducted in 2008 about the gang activities and where gangs are reported in the state. As you see, I think there were maybe 20 counties that did not report any type of gang activity. The rest did. Here we got the most violent gangs in Tennessee, the 8 cities in major cities in Tennessee, from Crips to Bloods to Gangster Disciples, Vice Lords. Challenges we face, and I want to stop here for a minute and talk about some things. First, you see rural police departments may lack resources, are often small or ill-equipped, which makes their communities attractive to gangs. I can remember sitting down with Commissioner Gibbons, and we would quite often go over the crime statistics in the state, because TBI is responsible for compiling those statistics. And we were looking at aggravated assaults and trying to figure out why are aggravated assaults going up in the state, especially in West Tennessee. And we just couldn't figure it out. It wasn't making sense. So I received a call from District Attorney General Jerry Woodall from Jackson, and he wanted to come up and talk to me. So he came up to my office, and he began to tell me about the gang problem that they were having in Jackson and the surrounding counties. Well, what kind of amazed me about what he was talking about was that he was just as concerned about the cities and the counties surrounding Jackson as he was about Madison County, because he began to tell me how the gangs were setting up shop in the smaller rural counties, going into the urban counties, back and forth, conducting their business, and were almost taking over some of the small rural counties. At the same time, I began to receive some calls from a friend of mine who had a mother down in rural West Tennessee, and he said, Director, he said, my mother and her little group of elderly friends often would walk around a track down there around Brownsville, Tennessee. And he said, you know, they've had to stop walking every morning now because there's a group of gang members that are on that track harassing them. And at that point, I just kind of took a deep breath and said, you know, we've got to do something about this. And it basically boiled down to, do we let them take our communities over, or do we run them out of our communities? And I raised my hand to the let's run them out of our communities. So with that, I began to talk more with District Attorney Jerry Woodall, and we decided that we needed to maybe form a coalition in West Tennessee and Jackson and surrounding areas, kind of a pilot project. And to that, I dedicated 2 of my drug agents full-time to basically be the liaison for the smaller counties down there in rural West Tennessee, to pull the intelligence from those small counties into Jackson and see if we could keep up and decide who was committing what types of crimes as far as it was gang-related. Because as I began to really look into the crime statistics, I saw that not only was the aggravated assaults being affected, but anybody that's dealt with any gangs know that you're looking at homicides, you're looking at drugs, you're looking at prostitution, and you're looking, as Margie Quinn will tell you here in just a minute, that they're also involved in human trafficking. So you got all of these crimes that these gangs are a part of. And I thought if we could somehow get our arms around the issue, we're bound to see some of these crimes reduce. As we started going on and talking, and I began to go to West Tennessee and meet with the law enforcement officers there, it was quickly made aware to me that they needed better equipment, better training, and so I went to work to see what TBI could do to help with this. So probably over a year later now, and we've added some more equipment thanks to Bill Scollin, and we've added more training down there, gang-related training. What are we seeing down there now? Well, gang-related crime, which had increased 59% in the last 5 years, is starting, I feel, to go down. With the implementation of several initiatives, the statewide gang database, which I'll talk a little bit about, in order to track gang members as they maneuver across the state, I felt we needed some type of database. We didn't have that in this state. So I got with the Fusion Center, somewhere found about $80,000, and decided to purchase a statewide gang database. From that, from 2012 and 2013, with all the initiatives, the implementation of the database, and what's so important about this database, and as Commissioner Schofield will talk about a little later, gang members are like an organization, and they're becoming more and more smart about how they commit their crimes. Just as they started to set up shop in the rural areas, you know, Memphis PD, Shelby County, the initiative they have there was putting a lot of heat on them. They're going to go where there's less resistance. I received a briefing not long ago in Washington, D.C., where they were talking about now the trend with a lot of gang members is not to get tattooed, not to get tatted up, so they could not be recognized. In fact, there was they were talking about how 2 rival gang, there was 4 guys, rival gangs, 2 of them walked by each other, nothing, didn't say, spoke. When 2 of the gang members got by, they turned around and shot the other 2 in the back of the head because they couldn't recognize. There were no tattoos or anything. But where's the one place? Where is the one place that if you're a gang member, you're going to acknowledge that you're a gang member? That's when you go to prison, and that's when you go to jail. So with that, we are now implemented the statewide gang database. Within the next 60 days, we'll have the TOMAS system, the state correctional system, going into this database. And my goal is, by spring, that we're going to start connecting all 95 jails into this database. Big production, big production. But we've got to do it. If we're going to really go after gangs in this state the way that we need to, we've got to gather and disseminate intelligence on these gang members, because they're going to keep moving. As we put heat on them in West Tennessee, they're going to come east. They're going to come to Middle. Probably not stop in Nashville because Metro Police Department and a lot of surrounding cities and counties have great gang task forces, but there are a lot of rural counties in Middle to East Tennessee that don't. So we've got to keep track of these gang members. Juvenile gang-related crime over the last 5 years has been steadily rising. However, another win. Between 2012 and 2013, juvenile gang-related crime has decreased 26%. As General Wyrick said, we've got to also look at the laws and how the laws change. Believe me, they know. The nuisance law in 2009, in March 2013, Metro Nashville Police Department worked a case on the Kurdish Pride gang, and it was the first gang in Tennessee to be declared a public nuisance. In 2013, members of the Riverside 90s, aka Riverside Rolling 90s, Neighborhood Crips, R90s, Farrington Street Boys were the second gang in Tennessee to be declared a public nuisance in Memphis. So as you see, it's got to be a whole community effort. It can't just be law enforcement going in with gangbusters. We've got to work on a state, federal, and local level with our U.S. attorneys, with the district attorney, to not only after we determine that these gangs are a public nuisance, that we hammer them in court. That's the only thing they understand. That's the only thing they understand is pressure. Keeping pressure on them every day. There's been many saturations, is what we call in West Tennessee. What are those for? Is to keep pressure on the gang members. In 2013, the TBI completed an integrated statewide gang database into our consolidated records management system. That was what I was just talking about. I felt it was important that we collect all the intelligence that we could on these gang members and share that intelligence. We distributed 15,000 gang reference guides to officers for gang identification. Kind of like human trafficking. I was shocked that so many law enforcement officers really were not trained to identify gang members. So we immediately set out to make a reference guide for all law enforcement, and we've now distributed over 15,000, which is huge. The creation of the West Gang Task Force between the 26th and 28th Judicial District, once again, coming together with our DAs, General Woodall, General Brown, to do that. It's important, and I've talked about a lot of this, but also nothing is more important, I feel, is to engage our rural communities with technology and training to support the utilization of various technology and gang databases. We can't just do this from an enforcement side. We've got to do it from a technology side, and all this has to come through our fusion center. We've got the best fusion center in the country. Why not leverage that to go after the gang members and to give law enforcement the intelligence that they need? Human trafficking in gangs, and I know you're going to talk on this, and I probably shouldn't much, but I just want to say that gangs, like I said, are enterprises that are involved in a lot of different activities. And Margie's going to come up now and talk about gangs and how we're seeing in human trafficking. I've been asked to lead a 20-person coalition, 20 of my counterparts in the U.S., to develop a national template and framework for human trafficking to report back to the White House. And part of that framework is going to be involving gangs and how they relate to human trafficking. They've already got a network set up, and they are getting to be heavily involved in human trafficking. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Margie. Oh, Dana goes next? I'm going to turn it over to Dana and let her talk about how they are affecting gangs.
Thank you, Director Gwynn. Hi, my name is Dana Moran, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of Criminal Justice Programs. And my topic is domestic and sexual violence and child abuse. And after me, then, Margie Quinn will be up to talk about human trafficking and gangs. My office, under the State Department of Finance and Administration, functions as strategic planning agency that secures, distributes, and manages federal and state funds for Tennessee. OCJP is one of the largest funders of victim services for both domestic and sexual assault in the state. Our director, Bill Scollin, is part of the governor's public safety subcabinet, and as such, we are involved in much of the planning process for the governor's public safety plan and many of the action steps. My goal for this presentation is to showcase the progress that we've made towards being successful in many of the action steps. It's also to discuss the impact that OCJP funding has had on the various issues, to identify the challenges we continue to face, and the next steps we have planned to address these issues. My additional hope is to leave you here motivated to come together and address issues in your local communities. My hope is that you'll leave here feeling a call to action to address our culture, which has remained silent on these issues for far too long, these issues which impact each and every one of us. So I'd like to start by talking about one day's impact. You heard the governor speak earlier today and address that over 51% of all crimes against the person are domestic violence related. Since we're in Metro Nashville today, I decided to pull from a local statistic. The Metro Nashville Police Department responds to approximately 85 domestic violence calls a day. That means that during General Wyrick's presentation, they went out on a call. During Director Gwynn's presentation, they went out on a call. They went out on another call as I took the microphone today, and they'll go out again when Margie Quinn steps up. Approximately 60 domestic violence victims access services at our 3 family justice centers across Tennessee. The National Network to End Domestic Violence does an annual study to get a glimpse of the services that are received by victims of domestic violence on one day. And based on their report, 405 beds were provided to victims of domestic violence. That's 180 children and 225 adults in one day. Our domestic violence shelters handle 313 hotline calls in one day. That's 13 calls an hour. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Our shelters are needed to provide housing for those victims who are in dangerous situations and who need a confidential location to ensure safety, their own safety, and the safety of their children. Most victims are able to receive services also from the community. So if they're not in need of coming into shelter, they can still receive court advocacy, support, counseling, right in their local communities. You heard the governor and Speaker Harwell mention earlier that since September of 2010, reports of domestic violence offenses have decreased by 15%, or just under 15%. And you also heard them speak to the fact that from the report, when men murder women, Tennessee improved their ranking from 3rd in the nation to 10th in the nation. Even with these strides, we still have to recognize over 50% of crimes against person are the result of domestic violence. Domestic violence occurs within our closest, most intimate relationships. This is not violence between strangers, but violence within relationships that should be a sense of support and comfort, trust and love. And these are just the ones that are reported. It is estimated that this number would be 3 to 4 times as big when you count those that go unreported. Within Tennessee, the single largest cause of non-accidental death of women is domestic violence. As a result of OCJP funding in FY 2014, over 38,000 domestic violence adult victims receive services. If we're really going to make an impact in domestic violence, we all need to come together. We need to take a stand. While victim safety is the most important aspect of intervening in domestic violence, and our OCJP-funded victim service programs provide needed safety planning, advocacy, and shelter services, my office also funds criminal justice programs that ensure offender accountability. Many law enforcement agencies have dedicated officers or units that have received specialized training and that respond to domestic violence incidents. These are the first step in the criminal justice process. Last year, the Office of Criminal Justice Programs funded 6 of these specialized law enforcement units. These units provide training to other local law enforcement agencies in their region. They also respond to investigate reports of violence against women. These 6 units worked over 1,500 domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking cases. They arrested 272 offenders. They assisted with 58 victims with emergency orders of protection, and they made over 2,700 referrals for victim services such as shelter and advocacy. After law enforcement makes an arrest, then as we all know, the case heads to court. Many of our judicial districts have prosecutors dedicated to prosecuting the many cases of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. It takes a special prosecutor to understand the dynamics of these cases and the intricacies of the laws. OCJP funded 7 of these specialized assistant district attorneys, across the state, and they'll come up, and they're represented on the map. These 7 specialized ADAs accepted 4,347 cases for prosecution. They assisted 309 victims with orders of protection, and they made over 3,000 referrals for victim services such as shelter and advocacy. Once the case is ended, many offenders receive batter's intervention as part of their sentences. OCJP funds the Domestic Violence State Coordinating Council, which is responsible for certifying batter's intervention programs across the state. To date, we have 25 programs that are certified and available as part of sentencing for these offenders. These programs are evidence-informed and are monitored for compliance by the council. Action Step 32 of the Governor's Public Safety Plan addressed mandatory sentencing. The new law applies to domestic assaults involving bodily injury and incidents, and the incidents must have occurred within 10 years of each other. So the mandatory sentence requirement would be that upon the second conviction of domestic assault, there's a mandatory minimum of 30 days of incarceration. Upon a third and subsequent conviction, 90 days of incarceration. This is in line with the theory of incarcerating those we are truly afraid of. These are our most violent offenders. But even with this, it's not enough. All domestic violence offenders should receive a lethality assessment to ascertain their propensity for future violence and to make sure that we are providing the appropriate level of supervision to moderate this risk. In addition, our victims should be aware of the level of violence, and so they can take necessary steps for their own safety. To continue to look at what we've accomplished in the area of domestic violence, and I know this was addressed earlier today, but as part of the Governor's Public Action Step 33, we look to increase the number of family justice centers across Tennessee. The goal is 5 to be providing services to victims in 2015. Most of you know that Knoxville and Memphis have been around and serving victims for a long time. Nashville opened their doors in October. Chattanooga and Cookeville are on target to open their doors later in 2015. And then the Office of Criminal Justice Programs is currently working with 3 other communities that hope to open their doors. I just wanted to take a minute and remind you what a Family Justice Center is. It's a co-location of a multidisciplinary team. This brings together law enforcement, prosecution, victim services, civil legal services. It's both public and private agencies working towards the same goal of intervening in domestic violence and increasing victim safety. They are an evidence-based approach. Tennessee has taken this model one step further, however, and paired it with the evidence-informed, coordinated community response model. They are more than just a building, more than just a place to come to receive services, but they also serve as centers to evaluate and assess practices within their communities and to make changes as needed to increase victim safety and offender accountability. The first step is opening the door, but a constant evaluation and assessment of the services offered and the impact the center is having on the community must occur continuously to meet the needs of victims and enhance the effectiveness of the local system. Additionally, in Action Step 33 of the Governor's Public Safety Plan, he sought to increase support for domestic violence shelters. Governor Haslam saw fit to appropriate $250,000 annually for family violence. In addition, OCJP is looking hard at the data from both the criminal justice system and the victim service agencies to determine the best future direction for needed programs, services, and training across the state. In working with the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence, OCJP is taking evidence-based and evidence-informed practices, training our shelter programs on these, and applying those to our programming, working with local agencies to ensure that they are implementing these practices with fidelity to the model, and then tracking their outcomes. In addition, to further support the work of domestic violence professionals and advocates across Tennessee, Tennessee provided funding to train allied professionals. In FY14, over 103 trainings were offered on these topics across the state. A total of more than 2,100 allied professionals were trained. Of those, 929 were law enforcement officers. I'd like to turn now to sexual assault. It's common knowledge that most sexual assault is committed by an assailant known to the victim. In fact, 90% of juvenile sexual abuse victims know their perpetrator. Yet we see what gets turned in and reported to law enforcement. It's much more common to report those that were not in the midst of a relationship. And I want to clarify something here. It speaks to the impact of the traumatic effect of sexual assault on victims. Sexual assault is an all too common part of the power and control tactics that are used by offenders against victims of domestic violence. Yet it is not often disclosed to law enforcement when this is part of their experience of domestic violence. I just wanted to address this overlap in how common it is for sexual assault to also occur in the midst of a domestic violence relationship. All in all, we've made progress in the area of sexual assault. Reported forcible rape has decreased by 23.8%, and as a result of OCJP funding in FY14, over 2,400 victims received services. But just as the case with domestic violence, when you look at the number that go unreported, this is still a crime we need to take a stand. People are not reporting it enough, and we are not intervening enough. And we as a society and a culture need to take a stand against that and say no more. I've brought this map to show you where our services are located. The purple region are the service area for our domestic violence programs, shelter programs across the state. There are 3 sexual assault centers, 1 in each of the Grand Divisions, and 10 of our domestic violence shelters provide dual services to sexual assault victims as well. As we talked about earlier, we have 3 family justice centers that have opened their doors: Nashville, Memphis, and Knoxville. And we have 5 more that are working towards implementing a family justice center within their own community. In the U.S. today, 5 children will die as a result of child abuse and neglect. Every day, children in Tennessee go to school and try to learn while coping with the impact of living in a domestic war zone, a home filled with terror. These children are misdiagnosed as ADHD, oppositional defiant, learning disabled. Instead of addressing the primary issue of living within a home with ongoing fear that their mother will be hurt or killed, fear that they may be hurt or killed, they are mislabeled, misdiagnosed. If we are going to make an impact, we need to make sure that we are dealing with the underlying problem that is affecting these children. The domestic violence, the child abuse, the sexual assault that is occurring within their home. Again, this is not a family issue. This is a societal issue. This is the cultural norm of our communities, and we have to change it. We all have to stand together and work together. The Stewards of Children curriculum that is part of the governor's goal of Action Step 34 is one of the tools to do just that. By teaching adults the signs and symptoms to look for in children, by defining child abuse, by talking about sexual abuse so that it is not a secret, by training adults how to report these crimes and seek help for victims, we're starting to make progress. Abused children are much more likely to have psychological disorders. They're more likely to commit violent crimes, and proper intervention is needed. Proper intervention to address the complex trauma that these children face, that these families face, is needed to have an impact. The challenges that we continue to face. In the Economic Council on Women's 2013 report, domestic violence is not a family matter. It is, in fact, one of the most debilitating and prevalent crimes in our society, and it perpetually extracts costs, both immediate and long-term, from every single one of us. Medical costs, social service costs, criminal justice expenses, lost wages to victims. This comes in the amount of $886 million in annual costs to our local communities. So if we are going to intervene, if we are going to break the cycle of violence, parents need to understand the signs and symptoms of childhood abuse, childhood sexual abuse, know how to report this crime, to hold offenders accountable, and how to get help for their children. Many of the women and children who are abused within our families, within their intimate relationships, have complex trauma issues and are susceptible to substance abuse and addiction. They need quality services to counter this impact of compounded trauma that they have experienced. As I've mentioned earlier, we need to assess our offenders so that we make sure that we are matching the level of intervention, the level of supervision with their level of risk for ongoing violence. This will require a high level of coordination between our local social service agencies and our law enforcement agencies. If we're going to break this cycle of violence, we need more civil and legal assistance for victims. Assistance in getting a divorce to escape an abusive relationship. Assistance with child custody issues that keep a woman trapped within an abusive relationship. Transitional housing is needed for our victims to help them escape and break the cycle of violence. We need Tennessee's Batter's intervention programs are still the best available option for impacting behavioral change in domestic violence offenders at this time. However, we need data to back that up. We know it's an evidence-informed program, but we need good data to show us that it's actually making a difference. We do know that anger management is an inappropriate referral for an offender of domestic violence. We need better data from our general sessions courts. Some of the court systems are not automated. And we need to collect data to better evaluate the impact of our mandatory minimum sentence that was just enacted to hold offenders accountable. Moving forward, and I've got a list of things that we can do moving forward to be more successful. OCJP has recently teamed up with the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence to conduct a needs assessment of both our domestic violence and sexual assault agencies, nonprofit and governmental. The results are being tabulated, but we will use that information to plan a coordinated effort to address those needs. My office has further partnered with the coalition to provide the first ever Sexual Assault Institute for sexual assault victim service providers this spring. The goal is to expand the depth and breadth of sexual assault services across the state. We're doing logic model training this December. A logic model is an effective tool in program development and program evaluation. It is a tool for the agencies to strategically plan how well they're doing what they're doing and whether they accomplish what they intend to accomplish. Our family justice centers will work hand in hand with our shelters and our law enforcement agencies and various other community groups and come together this spring to receive training on a coordinated community response model for engaging a community and building a coordinated response to domestic violence. We also look to provide safety assessment training in various regions across the state this spring. The Office of Criminal Justice Programs hopes to partner with the Tennessee District Attorney General's Conference to provide evidence-based prosecution training over the summer as well. As you can see from my slide, there's many other initiatives and much that my office would like to do to work and intervene in the area of domestic violence, sexual assault, and victim services. I'm going to go ahead and move forward. I would be remiss not to share a victim's voice when we talk about domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse. Recent media attention has brought all these issues to the forefront. The No More campaign is on your television screen most weekends, and I hope if you haven't seen that, you'll look for it online. Furthermore, the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic Violence and many local shelters and advocacy programs are offering a Call to Men presentation. This is a community call to action and a prevention campaign. So if you see those in your communities, I encourage you to attend. And still, there's more that can be done.
My name is Margie Quinn, and I'm with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and I'm going to talk to you for the next 20 minutes about human trafficking and a little bit about the action step, which I think has led us here today. Action Step 34, which Dana had just referenced, is an action step set up by the sub-cabinet that enables us to increase awareness on things like childhood sexual abuse, sexual violence in the home, including human trafficking, the sex trafficking of our children and youth. Our goal was really two-pronged. One was to train first responders, and the other was to raise awareness across the state amongst Tennesseans. In TBI's initial report to the legislature in 2011, we queried all law enforcement, DCS, juvenile court clerks, about 3,500 folks. We got about 1,000 responses back to that initial survey. And one of the things we asked was, do you feel like your department is adequately trained to recognize and identify cases of human sex trafficking? With 94% of law enforcement reporting, 79% said they didn't think that their agencies were adequately trained to even identify a victim of human sex trafficking. At TBI, we felt like that was an emergency. We had to go out and train first responders, as well as increase awareness across the state for things like human sex trafficking. We've got to train on the signs and signals of human sex trafficking, and to that end, we've produced a lot of material similar to the gang reference guide. We've produced an identification response card. We've probably handed out about 30,000 across the state, those blue reference cards for law enforcement and other first reporters, responders. We're looking at law enforcement, DCS, healthcare workers, health departments. A lot of these victims are showing up in health departments and emergency rooms, and we've got to train those folks as well to recognize a case of human sex trafficking, to differentiate that case from a domestic violence case, from a sexual assault case. It may be a domestic violence case, but if you ask a couple of more questions, you may also learn that you're dealing with a human trafficking victim. As of this November, we've trained at TBI in substantive classes 2 hours to anywhere from 2 hours to 3 days, about 12,000 first responders across the state of Tennessee. The reason why we need to train, I think, our first responders is well, there are quite a number of reasons, obviously. We've got to develop treatment and service options that emphasize that the child victim needs help, not prosecution. In 2011, the General Assembly decriminalized prostitution for minors, which means that you can no longer arrest a 13-year-old in this state for prostitution. Until 2011, the code was in conflict. Part of the code said these kids were criminals, they were prostitutes, and another part of the code said no, in fact, they're human trafficking victims per se. So that clarification, I think, within our framework, I think has helped us at least to define trafficking and train that to our first responders. The alternative to this, if we don't train, if we don't teach our first responders how to recognize the signs and signals of a trafficking victim, it means that trafficking victim goes unrecognized, unreported in some cases, unrescued, and their trauma continues and goes unresolved. These statistics that are on the screen right now are statistics out of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They are also statistics from NISMART, the National Center, the National Incident Studies for Missing, Runaways, Abducted, and Throwaways. 13 years of age is the average age of entry into the commercial sexual industry. 13 years old. 7 years is their life expectancy once they are commercially sexually exploited. It is fatal. And 48 hours is the time it takes a pimp or a recruiter to locate a child once they are in a runaway incident. 48 hours. 1 in 3 will be approached for the purposes of commercial sexual exploitation within 48 hours of that run incident. So what does that mean for the state of Tennessee? Well, there are between 600 and 900 kids reported missing every single month in our state. Every month. Roughly 50% of those are runaways. If you do the math and you put the 1 in 3, that's 1,400 kids a year at risk for commercial sexual exploitation just by virtue of being a runaway. Vulnerable populations is what we're really talking about here, at-risk populations. Kids who are at risk to traffickers, to gangs, and those individuals who would exploit them for commercial purposes, for money. This is really just about the money. So who are these kids? Well, the standard profile of a trafficking victim is a runaway or a throwaway. They come from dysfunctional homes. They have a history of sexual abuse or physical abuse. I'll tell you that's, I think at TBI, that's the common theme, the common thread that runs through most of the victims that we have seen at TBI is unresolved sexual trauma in their past. So they're a child rape victim at 5, at 7, at 10. They are trafficking victims at 14 and at 15 because that sexual trauma has gone unresolved and unmitigated. Many of these kids have witnessed domestic violence. As Dana was just telling you, they come out of war zones. And that sort of overexposure to domestic violence, childhood sexual abuse, creates a very vulnerable child, creates an at-risk child. Many times these kids have criminal histories. They are more likely to commit crimes. They are more likely to engage in criminal behavior. These are not nice kids. They're not. I've sat across from them. Many of you in this room have sat across from them. You want to shake them up and throw them out a third-floor window. They're unpleasant children. But you know what? If I'd been exposed to childhood sexual abuse from the time that I was 6 years old, I would probably be unpleasant too. They've got a reason to be unpleasant. They have a history of drug abuse or witnessing parental drug abuse. We've talked a little bit about the number of meth lab seizures in this state and the number of children being removed from meth homes every year in our state. Vulnerable and at-risk kids. And they have chronically low self-esteem. So this is a pretty popular continuum of childhood sexual abuse as it relates to human sex trafficking. So there's a linking of love, sex, and abuse. There's a violation of boundaries. There's guilt and shame that is put on the victim. And they go through the continuum until they end up meeting a recruiter or a trafficker or a pimp. And in many cases, this is unorganized. In many cases across our state, and we've seen statistics as high as 30% start out being trafficked by their parent or guardian. That's, I know, hard to kind of wrap your head around, but they are. They're trafficked first in their home. They're sold first in their home. When we did that initial report to the legislature in 2011, we called the folks that we were going to query, that we were going to send the survey to. And we talked to one juvenile court clerk. And we explained to her what human trafficking was, and we talked to her about what we were doing, what the study that we were conducting, and the answers that we were looking for. And we said, do you have human trafficking? And it was a very rural West Tennessee location. And I said, do you think that's occurring here? And she said, oh yeah, we got parents trading their kids for sex down here all the time. Juvenile court clerk. This is happening in our rural counties as well as our urban locations. We're seeing victims branded, victims tattooed. There's a fairly alarming trend to barcode youth and children. And this, of course, denotes that they are property. They are merchandise. They are for sale. The right-hand picture is the tattoo or brand of T-Rex, Terrence Yarborough, who was a particularly vicious pimp out of Memphis. He was prosecuted in federal court down in Memphis. But he used what we call guerrilla tactics. He was very brutal, very manipulative, very violent with his victims. The TBI filed a follow-up report to its original 2011 study called The Geography of Trafficking in the State of Tennessee. And what we did in that report was look at the 21 counties in the state that reported the highest numbers of minor human sex trafficking, the sex trafficking of our children. And we looked and compared the different things within those particular counties that might give rise to a crime like human sex trafficking. So, in other words, how many sex offenders with offenses against a minor? Is there a demand in that particular location? Because sex trafficking is a demand-driven crime. Sex trafficking is a demand-driven crime. If there was not a demand for children to have sex with, there would not necessarily be a supply. So we're also looking at rural versus urban, median education levels, children living below the poverty levels, meth lab seizures in that state, children removed because of drug-addicted parents. Lake County is one that stood out for us. Lake County is in the upper northwest tip of the state. And Lake County has 23 out of every 1,000 residents is a sex offender with an offense against a minor. Lake County's only 7,000 residents. They reported 16 to 25 cases of minor human sex trafficking. Law enforcement reported the cases. And 46% of Lake County's kids are living below the poverty level. 46%. That's more than twice the national average. So is poverty a driver of human sex trafficking? Yes, it is one of the drivers. It is one of the things that we can't ignore, that children living in impoverished households are vulnerable and at risk. We're talking about vulnerable and at-risk populations. What circumstances come together within a child's life, poverty, exposure to domestic violence, childhood sexual abuse, that are going to put them on a trajectory towards a crime like trafficking? The advent of broadband across our state is definitely a major driver of this particular crime. Human sex trafficking is a multi-jurisdictional crime. It is both familial as well as organized. We know that there are organized gangs utilizing human sex trafficking as a criminal enterprise. Prior to a couple of years ago, prior to the passage of dozens of new laws in our state, it was a misdemeanor to sell a 14-year-old girl for sex in this state. A misdemeanor. It's a Class A felony to sell a kilo of cocaine. And a kilo of cocaine is illegal in and of itself to possess, unlike a girl. And it is not a reusable, resellable commodity, unlike a human being. So when you're looking at low-risk, high-reward crimes, the crime of human sex trafficking, prior to a couple of years ago in our state, was a very low-risk, very high-reward crime. So we have now flipped that on its ear. It is now a very high-risk crime with significant penalties, Class A or Class B, depending on the age of the child. But the problem with this crime is that it is multi-jurisdictional, very similar to the way gangs move in and around this state. Human sex trafficking is moving in and around our state and our region and across our country. We have located our juveniles in South Carolina, in Florida, in Canada, in California, in Nevada, all over the country they're being trafficked. And we've found girls here from other states as well. The advent of broadband, 86% of the rural populations of the state of Tennessee have access to broadband, which means they have access to human sex trafficking. The jump up companies like Backpage.com, who made about $35 million off sex advertising alone last year. Most of the girls that we see in Tennessee are being advertised on Backpage.com as escorts. Yes, a 14-year-old girl with her rear end hanging in the air and a price tag on it is what you will see if you go to Backpage.com. The advent of broadband has made the issue of trafficking and prostitution and many other crimes much more difficult for us to combat because it is happening all across the web and in some cases the deep web as well. So moving forward, how do we combat a crime like human sex trafficking? How do we answer the objectives that we were given in Action Step 34, which was to raise awareness amongst Tennesseans, 3% of Tennesseans. So that's quite a big chunk. As the director and I have had many conversations, as well as Executive Officer Elena Tate, about how do we reach that number of Tennesseans. And so we decided ourselves that we should harness the power of the World Wide Web. And we go internet, we go big. We develop PSAs, a Facebook page, a Twitter account. We engage communities, we engage college campuses. And we developed a marketing strategy at TBI, and it's very simple. It's called It Has to Stop. It is human trafficking, and it has to stop. And so with the advent of the branding of human trafficking in our state, we want to put that out all over the state, from tip to tip, Bristol to Memphis, so that no matter where you are or where you go, if you see this particular brand, you know we're talking about human trafficking, and you know that it has to stop. Early on, in the early days after 2011, the TBI partnered with the Women's Fund Alliance. And the Women's Fund Alliance in Chattanooga, Nashville, and Memphis came together for the first time, the women's funds in these cities, and they formed an alliance, and they did fundraising, and they raised money to take on the advertising of the human trafficking hotline in our state, which rings into the Fusion Center. So they took on the advertising of that as a philanthropic endeavor. And they engaged a really good marketing company to come up with a strategy and a campaign, and this is what they came up with. And we have now partnered with Commissioner Whitaker and TDOT to put these posters on the back of every restroom stall and every welcome center and rest area in the state. The welcome centers alone see more than 12 million visitors a year. So we have now exposed not only Tennesseans, but individuals who travel through our state to an anti-trafficking message. We've given them the tools, we've given them websites and phone numbers that they can call if they suspect human trafficking. We've also trained the security companies and the workers who are in the welcome centers and the rest stops. Because we know anecdotally that trafficking victims are moved on average every 7 days. They're moved every 7 days. across our state and across our region. Many times, they are so controlled by their pimps and their traffickers that the only time they are ever by themselves is when they're in the restroom. So putting that message in a place where a victim can see it becomes very important. And we think that's what this poster does. This was initiated in June of this year. Again, it is now in all rest stops and welcome centers. We estimate the exposure to be about 5 million at this point. So that's a great way, a simple way, I think, but a very innovative way to reach not only across our state, but probably across our region. So one of the last things we did, and this was a Director Gwen initiative, was to film PSAs. PSAs that would go up in, let me go back. Can I go forward one? There we go. We're looking for areas to put this PSA. In other words, we'd like it shown on the jumbotrons at college football games, NFL games, NHL hockey games, any of those places where large numbers of people congregate, and expose them to an anti-trafficking message. So they are very clear on where we stand in the state of Tennessee when it comes to the selling of our children for sex. The governor was very gracious and participated in this first series of PSAs. We were very thankful for his participation. Obviously, his voice and his weight carry quite a bit of influence across our state. Here's the PSA.
It happens every day.
Every 2 minutes.
Someone buys a child for sex. It isn't a good time.
It can lead to a life of shame,
Pain and darkness.
and it happens here.
It happens here.
It is human trafficking, and Tennessee won't stand for it.
Because it hurts,
And real men don't do it.
With some of the toughest laws in the nation,
and police and nonprofits on the front lines.
The only thing missing is you. It isn't someone else's problem.
It's Tennessee's.
and we can put an end to it together.
You
You
can do something about it. Find out how at ithastostop.com.
Thank you. I'm told by Linda Russell that we have time, the panel has time for a few questions and answers, if anybody has any questions of any of the panel members.
Margie, after you've put the ads in the restrooms, have you seen an uptick in the calls to the hotline that you've got referenced in the ads?
We have seen an uptick. Once our calls went up about 100% once the Women's Fund did their press conference. In fact, the day after the press conference, we got a call at 7 a.m. on a 14-year-old girl on Backpage. The hotline doesn't receive a tremendous number of calls, but I would say that once the public awareness campaign has started, the quality of the calls has really gone up exponentially. We have rescued 4 juveniles as a result of hotline calls alone in the state of Tennessee over the past 2 years.
Other questions, comments?
Margie, when you were showing the statistics on sex trafficking, on the bottom of the slide, you also shown meth lab seizures.
Yes.
Explain again the correlation between the two.
Well, I think Dana and I have both touched on it. When you grow up in a home where you have drug-addicted parents or parents who are cooking meth, your vulnerability and your at-risk just goes up exponentially. And so looking at the county's Again, we're looking at what's occurring in those particular 21 counties. 17 of those counties are rural counties. So this is every bit as much a rural problem as it is an urban problem in our state. And we're looking at what's occurring in those particular counties that may give rise to these big numbers of kids being sold for sex. And so looking at drug-addicted homes, drug-addicted parents is part of that equation.
Specifically, ma'am?
Well, we know, for instance, that we removed 300 kids alone last year out of meth homes. So meth is one of the big drivers in the state of Tennessee as far as drug addiction, drug-addicted parents. I can tell you, as the Amber Alert Coordinator in the state for 6 years, the number of kids that we issued endangered child alerts for and Amber Alerts for because their meth cooking parents took off with them is astronomical. It causes a huge problem.
Marjorie, I have a small department, and sending people to training interfere with the working schedule, keep people on the road. Are you going to be able to provide online training for officers?
We do. In fact, we expect to roll that out in January. The TBI has just purchased a very sophisticated, high-tech online training platform, and we have worked to, I did a 1-hour presentation for the Vanderbilt Health Network that's been on their online system for a year. And so we have provided that, we put that 1-hour block out on the internet and will be available probably in January. It may be available now, but we will come out into your region. I've come out and done in-service training for departments as well. So if you contact us, we'll make arrangements, we'll come to you and provide the training, or you can have it online or both.
Then I'll get with my sheriff and we'll arrange that.
Thank you.
My question is for Dana, and with regards to the shelters. Based on the map that is being shown, there's not enough state-funded shelters across the region. But we do have privately funded one, like in my town, there is a non-for-profit shelter being that we have over there. My question is, do you track the programs and the successes of these private shelters, and are they eligible for funding from your office?
Thank you. The map was specifically OCJP funded programs, and those are the ones that we track. And when there's an opportunity to go out for competitive funding, then it becomes available to those that meet the requirements under the statutes for family violent shelters.